Okay, today we're diving into one of the greatest hidden stories of the entire space race. We're talking about how the Soviet Union secretly landed on Mars, what that one terrifying image it sent back actually was, and yeah, the monster that destroyed it. So, a secret spacecraft, a terrifying image, a monster on Mars? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but this isn't fiction. This is the incredible, very real, and very secret history of the first time humanity ever landed on another planet. And believe me, the truth is way stranger than you could imagine. All right, so to really get why this whole mission was shrouded in secrecy, we've got to rewind the clock. We're going back to the absolute peak of the Cold War. You have to understand, the battle for supremacy wasn't just being fought on Earth. No way. It stretched all the way out to the planets. You see, the two superpowers, the US and the USSR, they had totally different playbooks. The Soviet Union, they were absolutely obsessed with scoring these spectacular firsts. You know, the first satellite, the first man in space, anything to grab the headline. The United States, though, they were playing a longer, much more methodical game. And for a long time, it looked like the Soviet strategy was working. They were winning. They had Sputnik, they had Yuri Gagarin, but then 1969 happened. The US landed on the moon, and that was it, the ultimate prize. For the Soviet leadership, this was an absolutely crushing defeat. So they desperately needed a new goal, a new spectacular first to reclaim their glory. And that new goal? It was Mars. So, the Soviets came up with this incredibly ambitious plan. I mean, they weren't just going to orbit Mars. No, they were going to be the very first to land on its surface and beat the Americans to the next great prize in the solar system. And their plan was pretty meticulous, you have to admit. First, they'd send a scout, an orbiter, to map the whole terrain, find a nice, safe landing zone. Only then would they send their two landers, Mars 2 and Mars 3. The idea was to give them the absolute best possible chance of success. It was a solid plan, really designed to leave nothing to chance. But you know how it goes, especially in space. Even the most perfect plans can go disastrously wrong. And for the Soviets, the whole thing fell apart right at the very first step. Yeah, that mapping orbiter, literally the eyes of the entire mission, it was gone. A simple error. Its engine timer was programmed incorrectly. So instead of heading to Mars, it just burned up in Earth's atmosphere. Now, the real problem was that the two landers were already well on their way, millions of miles out. You can't just call them back or reprogram them. So the engineers had this impossible choice. Do they abort the whole thing, or do they try to land on a planet they can't even see? Well, they chose to gamble. They were going in blind. So let's see how this incredible, desperate attempt actually played out. With absolutely no maps, no guide, the fate of the first ever landing on Mars now rested completely on luck. Well, the first lander, Mars 2, it didn't make it. The entry angle was just too steep, the parachutes failed, and it slammed right into the surface. It actually became the first human-made object to touch Mars, just, in a million pieces. But then, just a few weeks later, Mars 3 arrived. And this time, everything went perfectly. It achieved a controlled soft landing, the first in all of human history on another planet. Can you just imagine being in that secret control room back in the Soviet Union? Suddenly, the signal they'd been praying for arrives, this strange whistling sound traveling across millions of miles of empty space. They had actually done it. They were on Mars. The lander immediately started sending back data. And for exactly 14.5 seconds, there was a live link between human beings on Earth and a machine sitting on the surface of Mars. And then, just as quickly as it started, silence. The signal was gone, vanished, forever. And this was the only thing Mars 3 ever sent home. It wasn't some clear picture of the Martian landscape. It was this garbled, confusing, almost abstract mess of lines. But the Soviets knew. They just knew that the clue to what destroyed their lander was hidden somewhere in this one single, terrifying image. So, the big question, right? What was the monster that killed the lander? And what on earth did this bizarre image actually show? Well, the answer, as it turns out, was being discovered at that very same moment by their rivals, the Americans. See, in this incredible twist of fate, NASA's Mariner 9 orbiter had also just arrived at Mars. Now, its only job was to take pictures. And when those American scientists turned its cameras toward the planet, well, they just couldn't believe what they were seeing. Because Mars wasn't a cratered world. It was a smooth, featureless ball. The entire planet had just disappeared. All the craters, the canyons, the mountains that other probes had seen before, all gone, replaced by this smooth, blank orb. It was like Mars had been completely wiped clean. This was the monster that killed Mars 3. It wasn't an alien. It was a planet-wide dust storm, a weather event so unbelievably massive, it had literally hidden an entire world from view. The Soviets, by just the worst luck imaginable, had managed to land right in the middle of the biggest storm in the entire solar system. Now, the lander was built tough, to handle extreme cold and low pressure. But what the designers didn't know, what nobody knew at the time, was that Martian dust carries a massive electrical charge. So this electrified dust probably just swarmed the lander, building up a huge static discharge until, zap, a massive short circuit. The radio, the batteries, the whole system was fried instantly. That catastrophic failure taught us a huge, hard-won lesson for every future mission to Mars. The weather can be just as deadly as the landing. So think about this. The Soviets had done the impossible. They landed on Mars. But this incredible moment, truly one of the greatest achievements in the history of exploration, was immediately buried. It became a state secret. The question is, why? Well, the answer is all about Soviet ideology. You see, for the state, a mission wasn't a success unless it was an absolute success. A partial victory? Landing on Mars but only getting 14.5 seconds of data and one messed up image? That wasn't a victory at all. To them, it was an embarrassment. So instead of shouting their historic achievement from the rooftops, they just classified all the mission files and hid them away. They literally let the world keep believing the race to land on Mars was still on, a race they had already secretly won. And that's the really strange legacy of Mars 3, isn't it? As a scientific mission, it was a total bust. It gave us no useful data, no clear pictures, but as a historical achievement, it was absolutely monumental. For decades, that victory was just lost, completely erased from history, only to be rediscovered after the Cold War when all those secret Soviet files were finally opened. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Was hiding history's first Mars landing a truly monumental human achievement? The right call, just for the sake of national pride? It really makes you wonder, what other incredible moments in history might still be hidden from us, just waiting to be rediscovered?